Hello and welcome to The World Today, everyone. I'm Richard Nta in Nairobi. Let's get started with the very latest from the Middle East. We start with news coming in from Turkey. 3 people have been killed and 2 police officers injured near the building housing the Israeli consulate in Istanbul. Now, according to Turkish local media, security forces neutralized the attackers. It is not clear what the intended target of the attack was, and we'll bring you more as this story develops. In other significant news, U.S. President Donald Trump says Iran could be taken out in one night, and that night may be Tuesday evening. Trump has set a deadline of Tuesday, 8 p.m. Washington time for Iran to make a deal and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. He also claims negotiations with Tehran via intermediaries are going well. Trump has repeatedly claimed Washington has won the war with Iran. But many U.S. experts say they believe the president is losing the conflict despite the overwhelming military advantage of the U.S. and Israel over Iran. Jim Spellman reports from Washington, D.C.
U.S. President Donald Trump took a victory lap at the White House Monday after a U.S. rescue mission recovered a pilot and crew member from an F-15 fighter jet shot down by Iran Friday. The operation resulted not only in the loss of that fighter jet, but also an additional A-10 Warthog warplane. And Trump says the U.S. destroyed 2 of its own cargo planes during the rescue operations, and several U.S. helicopters were also damaged or destroyed. Still, Trump painted the incident as a success.
Both members of the crew ejected from the aircraft and landed alive on Iranian soil. I immediately was asked to make a decision. I ordered the U.S. Armed Forces to do whatever was necessary to bring our brave warriors back home. A risky decision, because we could have ended up with 100 dead as opposed to 1 or 2. It's a hard decision to make. But in the United States military, we leave no American behind. We don't do it.
The incident does little to change the larger dynamics of this war. According to Trump, negotiations are underway, but few details have emerged. He set a deadline of Tuesday at 8 p.m. Washington time for the Strait of Hormuz to be fully reopened, or he says the U.S. will attack civilian power plants and bridges across Iran. Attacking civilian power plants could potentially be a violation of international law. Critics say Trump's handling of the war has been misguided and erratic.
President Trump seems keen on taking the madman theory to new heights by demonstrating that there is basically no red line, no limitation in what he's willing to do in order to achieve his objectives. He also seems pretty furious because of the fact that this war now in its 6th week has not been as clean and easy as he expected to begin with. And this is a war that started as a war of choice, but now has turned into a war of necessity, because without reopening the Strait of Hormuz, this critical choke point, there is no way the president can frame this as a win.
The longer the strait remains mostly closed and oil prices remain high, the more the war is becoming a political liability for President Trump at home. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.
Iran has rejected a U.S. proposed peace plan and delivered its response via Pakistan in a 10-point document. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Ismaili Baghei says Washington has lost its diplomatic credibility with its record of launching attacks during peace negotiations. Baghei also called Trump's deadline for Iran to make a deal and reopen the Strait of Hormuz as a war crime.
دلیلش تجربه است. آتش بس یعنی چی؟
Iran should not hesitate in defending its country because of any so-called deadline. The reason we do not accept a ceasefire is based on past experience. A ceasefire means a brief respite, allowing the other side to strengthen its forces and commit more crimes afterward. No reasonable person would do that. Our demand is to end this imposed war and ensure that the cycle of ceasefire and war does not repeat.
Baghei also said the recent U.S. operation to rescue a downed fighter jet pilot in central Isfahan province could be a deception operation aimed at stealing Iran's enriched uranium. He says the U.S.'s operation ended in complete failure. Trump says Iran's 10-point peace proposal is a significant step, but not good enough. Ishan Kiavani reports from Yazd.
According to the state-run Iran news agency, Tehran has sent its response to Pakistan to U.S. proposal for ending the war following, quote, comprehensive deliberations at the highest levels of the leadership. The response is laid out in 10 clauses. It rejects a ceasefire and instead insists on a permanent end to the war while taking into account Iran's considerations. The text also lists a series of demands, including an end to hostilities in the region, the establishment of a safe transit protocol through the Strait of Hormuz, which not surprisingly protects Iran's economic interests, and lifting of sanctions. All of this comes as intensified airstrikes by U.S. and Israeli aircraft continue to hit the country. We've just seen attacks in the central city of Isfahan, the capital Tehran, and for the first time in the small town of Natanz, which sits right next to one of Iran's major nuclear enrichment facilities. We've also had fresh strikes on petrochemical sites in the south, as well as on natural gas facilities in Bushehr province. And in the early hours of Monday, Sharif University of Technology was hit in Tehran. In the latest wave of targeting military officials, the Islamic Revolution Guard Corps, the IRGC, announced that Majid Khadami, the head of its intelligence organization, was killed. In response, Iran keeps targeting the very same places, including petrochemical facilities in its Arab neighbors across the Persian Gulf. Hassan Keibani, CGTN, yes.
China says the escalating conflict does not serve anyone's interest. It calls on all parties to play a constructive role in easing the situation and promoting peace talks.
Violence does not bring peace. A political solution is the only way out. The root cause of the conflict in Iran lies in the fact that the United States and Israel, in violation of international law, have launched armed attacks against Iran. The pressing priority is to achieve an immediate ceasefire and return to dialogue and negotiation in order to fundamentally resolve the issue and restore peace and stability in the Gulf region. All parties should act in good faith to end this unwarranted war as soon as possible.
Trump has repeatedly pushed back his ultimatums over the past weeks, demanding Tehran to reopen the strategic waterway. On March the 21st, Trump said Iran had a 48-hour deadline to open the strait, or the U.S. would hit and obliterate its power plants. On March the 23rd, he paused the deadline for 5 days amid what he calls productive talks. He then extended the deadline by 10 days on March the 26th to April the 6th. On Saturday, he warned Iran that it had 48 hours to make a deal or all hell will rain down on it. And on Sunday, Trump pushed back the deadline again to April the 7th, 8 p.m. Washington time. UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric says any attack on Iran's civilian infrastructure is a clear violation of international law. He was responding to questions about Trump's threats to bomb bridges and other civilian infrastructure in Iran.
The Secretary General has been very clear on issues regarding international law, and he urges yet again all parties to abide by their obligations regarding the conduct of these hostilities. And he recalls that civilian infrastructure, including energy infrastructure, may not be attacked, even if specific civilian infrastructure were to qualify as a military objective. International humanitarian law would still prohibit attacks against them if they may be expected to cause excessive incidental civilian harm.
Dujarric reiterated the UN's chief statement calling for the parties to stop the conflict, stressing that there is no viable alternative to the peaceful settlement of international disputes. European Council President Antonio Costa says the bombing of Iranian power plants or any civilian infrastructure, including energy facilities, is illegal and unacceptable. He believes only a diplomatic solution will settle the root causes of the conflict. The UN nuclear watchdog says military strikes close to Iran's Bushehr nuclear power plant pose a very real danger to nuclear safety and must stop. The International Atomic Energy Agency says its findings are based on independent satellite imagery analysis. One strike landed just 75 meters from the plant's perimeter. Iran's atomic energy chief, Mohammad Islami, told the IAEA Director Rafael Grossi that the watchdog's inaction is emboldening attacks on nuclear facilities. Islami says Bushehr's, Iran's only operating nuclear power plant, has been targeted 4 times. One security staff member was killed and others injured in the most recent strike on Saturday. Islami warns that attacks on an operating reactor risk radioactive release with irreparable consequences for the people, the environment, and neighboring countries. A delegation from the Chinese Kuomintang, led by Chairperson Cheng Liwen, arrived in Shanghai at noon on Tuesday, marking the start of a mainland visit running through Sunday. The group is scheduled to visit Jiangsu Province, Shanghai, and Beijing. It marks the first time in a decade that a KMT chairperson has led a delegation to the Chinese mainland. Now, over the years, senior officials of the Kuomintang have visited the Chinese mainland, promoting the peaceful development of cross-strait relations. In 2005, Lian Shan led the delegation on the Journey of Peace, becoming the first sitting chairman to visit the mainland since 1949. Between 2008 and 2011, Wu Po-Husiang visited multiple times as the chairman, advancing cross-strait exchanges. In 2015, Eric Chu visited and met with Xi Jinping, restarting high-level dialogue between the Kuomintang and the Communist Party of China. In 2016, Hong Hsiu-shu visited the mainland to attend events marking the 150th anniversary of the birth of Dr. Sun Yat-sen, upholding the 1992 consensus. And in 2023, Ma Ying-jeou visited as a former chairman of the Kuomintang, initiating interactions across the strait. To Lam, General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam's Central Committee, has been elected as Vietnam's state president for the next 5 years. The decision was made at the first session of Vietnam's 16th National Assembly. Born in July 1957, To Lam served as the Minister of Public Security of Vietnam from 2016 to 2024. He was elected as the country's president in May 2024 and General Secretary of the CPB Central Committee in August of that year. Well, that is it for this edition of The World Today. I'll be back shortly with more news from the continent in Africa Live. Thanks for watching. The UN is set to scale up humanitarian efforts in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, as the country's civil war approaches its 4th year. Rwanda holds commemoration for the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, where over 1 million people were killed in 100 days. On World Health Day, we examine why women, despite forming the backbone of global health systems, continue to be underrepresented in leadership roles. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. Coming up in business, Nigeria's Dangote oil refinery helps ease Africa's energy supply challenges brought on by the Iran war. And in sports, triumphant return home for the DRC's Leopards after qualifying for the World Cup. Once again, a very warm welcome to Africa Live. We begin with the latest on the Sudan conflict, where the United Nations says it's expanding humanitarian operations. UN spokesperson Stéphane Dujarric said the resident and humanitarian coordinator is returning to the capital, Khartoum, with a core team to scale up the UN's presence on the ground. This comes amidst ongoing violence, including a drone strike by the paramilitary rapid support forces that killed at least 10 and injured 22 others at a hospital in White Nile State last week. The World Health Organization says there has been over 200 attacks on healthcare facilities since the conflict began, causing more than 40,000 deaths. The UN has called for the protection of medical staff and facilities in Sudan.
The arrival of Ms. Brown and her team signals a renewed commitment to expanding humanitarian operations in the capital and beyond at a time where needs are skyrocketing. More than 1.6 million Sudanese people have also returned to Khartoum in recent months, even as explosive remnants of war and damaged infrastructure continue to pose serious risks. Once again, our humanitarian colleagues are sounding the alarm that drone attacks continue to endanger civilians and deepen humanitarian needs throughout Sudan. We reiterate that medical personnel and facilities must be protected as international humanitarian law requires.
Within days, Sudan's conflict will enter its 4th year, with fighting still raging in the western Kordofan and Darfur regions. That civil war has threatened to split the country into two while causing a severe humanitarian crisis. According to the UN, Sudan is the world's largest hunger, health, and displacement crisis. And that situation is getting worse due to limitations brought on by the conflict in the Middle East. CGTN's David Mbithi reports.
Zainab Al-Samani fled the city of Nyala in the South Darfur region after her living situation became untenable. She's one of Sudan's displaced millions who have lost so much to a conflict that still appears to have no end in sight.
I am from Nyala. The city is besieged from all sides by the rapid support forces. Citizens cannot go to work, and the markets have been burned. Nyala's main market was burned, and the people's sources of income have ceased. Life has completely stopped. There's no electricity, and there are problems with water, health, and the environment.
Across the country, many are trying to cope with this grim reality, but the hope for better fortunes will have to wait. Now fuel prices are soaring as the US-Israeli war on Iran reaches its 6th week, causing higher transportation costs that have impacted the prices of nearly every commodity. The price of bread has risen by 25%, and bakeries are now pushing that cost onto consumers. Sudan imports roughly 80% of its wheat from external markets, and it's the diesel trucks that do the heavy lifting of moving the goods to markets across the country.
There has been an increase in bread prices. 5 loaves used to cost 1,000 Sudanese pounds, but now you can only get 4. We used to buy a sack of flour for 43,000 or 44,000 Sudanese pounds per kilo before the war, but now it costs 58,000 or 59,000 pounds per kilo.
Some local economists are predicting a sharp rise in inflation in the coming weeks if the war in the Middle East continues to escalate.
The impact of the war has been reflected in the rise of fuel prices, which in turn will significantly increase production costs, whether agricultural, industrial or otherwise. This will place a heavy burden on the Sudanese citizen, who is still suffering from the ravages of war and its repercussions.
The World Food Programme says Sudan's 3-year civil war has left more than 40% of the population facing acute food insecurity, and parts of the country have reported famine conditions. Violence has also decimated the country's health and sanitation system, creating a perfect breeding ground for diseases such as cholera. David Mbidi, CGTN.
In Somalia, the military says it has killed a dozen al-Shabaab militants in its latest operation to dismantle the group's stronghold in the southwest. The operation was carried out early Monday in the Denune area, where militants have targeted supply routes and carried out extortion against local businesses, farmers, and private companies. Several militants were also wounded in the operation. Al-Shabaab, which self-identifies as an al-Qaeda affiliate, was driven out of Mogadishu in 2011. It, however, retains a foothold in rural areas where they continue their efforts to create an Islamic state in Somalia. Rwanda is upholding its annual commemorations for the nearly 1 million ethnic Tutsis who were slaughtered in a genocide in 1994. On Tuesday, President Kagame and First Lady Jeanette Kagame attended an opening ceremony of the week-long event at the Kigali Genocide Memorial. The flame of hope will also be lit and is set to burn for 100 days, marking the duration of the genocide. Later today, the Walk to Remember will take place, with thousands expected to join in the march that organizers say stands as a powerful act of remembrance and unity. Flags will also fly at half-mast through to April the 13th. The genocide was conceived by extremist elements of Rwanda's majority Hutu population who planned to kill the minority Tutsi population and anyone who opposed their genocidal intentions. And to Djibouti, the government has announced that 67 international observers will monitor Friday's presidential election. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation says the observers are from the African Union, as well as several regional organizations, including the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, the League of Arab States, and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. There are only two candidates, the incumbent President Ismail Omar Guelleh and Omar Farah Samata from the opposition. And to Cameroon now, and President Paul Biya has appointed his son, Frank Emmanuel Biya, as the country's vice president. This follows Parliament's approval of a constitutional amendment to reintroduce the position. A joint session of the National Assembly and Senate, largely dominated by the ruling party, passed the bill 200-18 last Saturday. The amendment stipulates that the vice president will automatically assume the presidency if the sitting president dies or resigns or becomes incapacitated. Opposition forces argue the amendment will consolidate executive power, but the government side says it will ensure continuity and avoid a power vacuum. CGTN Sophia Shimachero looks deeper into the new role.
After independence in the early 1960s, Cameroon's Francophone East and Anglophone West united to form a federal republic. It included a president and vice president, which were intended to represent both sides. However, the vice presidency was abolished in 1972 when a constitutional amendment established a unitary state. This didn't sit well with many in the Anglophone West who felt their interests wouldn't be properly addressed. Their anger intensified in 2008 when a constitution revision removed the two-term presidential limit, enabling President Paul Biya to run for a third term in 2011. This move triggered violent protests across the country, which are also fueled by cries over high unemployment rates, corruption, and increases in the cost of living. Unlike the past elected version, the new vice president will be appointed and dismissed directly by the president. The role also replaces the current system where the Senate president was to be the interim successor. While the VP completes the presidential term, the draft bill states that they will be barred from initiating further constitution revisions or running for office immediately following the interim period. Sophia Shmechero, CGTN.
We continue our series now on the transatlantic slave trade. Almost 2 weeks ago, the UN General Assembly passed a resolution proclaiming the transatlantic African slave trade the most serious crime against humanity. Although not legally binding, the resolution once again casts a spotlight on the issue of reparations, which has been a hot topic for decades now. During the transatlantic slave trade, which lasted almost 400 years, millions of Africans were kidnapped and forcibly transported to the Americas for forced labor in mines and on plantations. In today's episode, we find out what Africans think of this recognition. Here are some views from Senegal and Nigeria.
We need to move beyond this colonial context. How can we reclaim this history instead of constantly portraying ourselves as victims in relation to the West? I also believe that, from a Western perspective, they must acknowledge their role. They must make amends for the historic wrongs they have inflicted on African countries. We, on the other hand, must reclaim our history and see how to move forward with it.
For me, recognition is a step forward in the history of the slave trade, because it's time for Africa to write its own history and tell it through its own worthy voices. Because, as you know, the slave trade was the greatest catastrophe humanity has ever experienced, especially for Africans. So for me, this is a decision that was long overdue.
This trade deserves to be classified as a very grave crime against humanity, because to come to a continent and do as you please, take the children we have and taking them to another continent to exploit them, I mean to make them work, has not been a good thing in the history of humanity. I think the UN resolution describing this trade as the greatest crime against humanity is a very good decision.
Up to now, we are still experiencing it through our religion, tribal, ethnicity, through our political system. Unknowingly to us,
growing up, seeing what has been done to us, it affects us mentally. Until date, there's still slave trade going on, but in the mind. And I think it's time for us to start writing our new stories.
Today is World Health Day, and this year's theme is Together for Health. Stand with Science, highlighting the critical role of scientific innovation, collaboration, and evidence-based solutions in overcoming global health challenges. The WHO says human health has been greatly transformed over the past century, largely due to scientific progress. Yet threats continue to grow due to challenges such as persistent disease and emerging diseases with epidemic or pandemic potential, as well as strained health systems. The UN Health Agency is calling for continued support and collaboration in science, standing against health misinformation, and working together to create a healthier future for all. Recent statistics indicate that women make up approximately 70% of workers in the health and social welfare sectors globally. But despite these high numbers, women remain underrepresented in senior leadership positions in the medical field. In Kenya, women doctors hold 40% of top-level leadership positions and 42% of mid-level roles in the national health sector. In Nigeria, about 33% of leadership roles in health organizations are held by women, but only 1 out of 28 directors of the federal medical centers is a woman. In South Africa, only 6 out of 26 higher education institutions which train doctors and lead medical researches were led by women by 2022. CGTN's Beryl Roro talked to one of the women. Let's take a look.
Globally, women make up just 25% of all leadership roles in the healthcare sector.
At the beginning of the entry level, a lot of women are getting into STEM careers, into research, into into science careers. So if I can look at it right now, medical graduates, about 50% of them are women. However, the more they progress, then the more we see this narrowing. It's as though the system somehow narrows and now starts filtering them out.
This reality exposes the need for intentional support to empower women to navigate the nuances of life as they participate effectively in the workplace.
So when I look at it myself, I was very hungry for female mentors who have been through the system, who have been mothers, who have been able to, have motherhood, have family, and still progress. And I had very strong female mentors who were able to pour into me and to show me that, there's nothing like a work-life balance. It's just giving priority to what matters at the time, but it is very possible.
After securing a seed grant from the World Health Organization for a mentorship initiative, Dr. Kanyari Mwendia now helps early career clinical researchers make inroads in this specialized field.
So when I moved into the clinical research space, I realized that I can't do this on my own. There are things that we're implementing in the studies that I need someone else's expertise. You have to work consultatively. So in this journey, I've been able to consult a lot, collaborate a lot with my colleagues and see what works, what doesn't work. So it has not been a solo journey.
In addition to advocating for women in clinical research, Dr. Mwendia seeks to advocate for more of innovations and trials to be done in Africa.
When I started working in clinical research, I started to see the bottlenecks that exist. One, when it comes to the access to innovation that we as Africans have. So of all the global clinical trials done worldwide, only 4% are done in Africa. So this is a very small number. And you know that the African genome is one of the most diverse genomes. Therefore, there is a great need to have the innovations that we're putting out more centered around the people and the people that we would be working on.
This year's theme for the World Health Day is Together for Health, Stand with Science, highlighting how professionals in science in Africa can rally support for the continent.
So starting from government, calling government to have more funding when it comes to R&D, for private sector to come together to do more work on the continent that is for the benefit of the population. When it comes to the global health organizations, to be able to have more long-term plans that have more of the health of the health of Africans in mind.
Beryl Oro, CGTN.
In line with this year's World Health Day, focus on scientific innovation to improve health systems, South Africa has added to another milestone to its fine reputation in advanced medicine. Tygerberg Hospital in Cape Town became the first in the country to perform an internal bone transport and limb lengthening procedure, something that's available at only a handful of centers worldwide. The first patient to undergo the procedure was a police officer who served for 30 years before being shot and wounded in the line of duty, an incident that ended his career. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
For several years, former South African police officer Wayne Jensen was weighed down by the pain of being shot in the thigh. The life-changing attack shattered his femur bone and shortened the limb by 50 millimeters.
When I tried to put my foot down, I just collapsed. There was no pressure on it. There was no pressure, I couldn't tap on it. It was just numb altogether. And I just dropped on the floor. I couldn't move that leg.
After multiple surgeries, Jensen lost hope of ever walking normally again. That was until he met a highly specialized team of doctors at Tygerberg Hospital. Surgeons recreated 50 millimeters of femur bone and restored the limb to its original length using an advanced implant system.
So what we do is we create a new fracture, a healthy fracture. So we can move that soft bone a little bit apart and the body forms more new bone. And we move it apart again and it forms more new bone. And this happens at 1 millimeter increments every day. And what is left behind is this soft, young, juvenile, healthy new bone that has essentially recovered the deficit that we had. And it takes an incredibly long time for that to heal and to become solid bone.
After years of trauma and the strain of being unable to walk, Wayne finally has his life back.
I was totally excited about it because I want to walk again. And when I look at my leg, I said, wow, for me, that was a miracle. Now my life is 110% better than what it was. I mean, I can take on anything. I want to go mountaineering, I want to go diving, I want to catch fish, I want to do everything.
To see him in the past 8 years suffering like that, it wasn't normal for us. And now to see a miracle happen, that has been a blessing from God, knowing what he was going through, knowing what my mom also was going through. It's just that they have been so blessed.
With limited global rollout, the technology places Tygerberg among the few public sector hospitals pioneering the next generation of life salvage innovation. The milestone surgery offers renewed hope for patients with long-term traumatic injuries particularly with South Africa's high rates of cancer, violent crime, and serious accidents.
We have a unique opportunity purely because of our trauma burden that we have, specifically in the state, to become very well versed in how to identify and manage these patients. And also we have a responsibility to the patients to find solutions for them.
South Africa has been at the forefront of medical advancement for decades. This latest surgery places the country at the global frontier of advanced limb reconstruction, with the potential to change the lives of millions, both at home and across the continent. Julie Shara, CGTN, Cape Town.
Time now for our business segment. Here are the headlines. Nigeria's Dangote oil refinery helps ease Africa's energy supply challenges brought on by the Iran war. And Egypt signs a deal to support the development of offshore gas fields in Cyprus. Well, welcome into the world of money. Nigeria's Dangote refinery, Africa's largest, has increased exports of gasoline and urea to African countries hit by supply disruptions caused by the U.S. and Israel's war with Iran. Dangote said the refinery, which is operating at its maximum capacity of 650,000 barrels a day, had helped cushion the full impact of the crisis both in Nigeria and across the continent. He said the facility had shipped some 17 cargoes of gasoline to other African nations, and exports of urea, a fertilizer, had also recently risen as buyers sought alternative sources of supply. Officials say the refinery has capacity to produce up to 3 million metric tons of urea annually, most of which is typically exported to the United States and South America. Dangote said the refinery hoped to get more crude cargoes priced in local currency to help curb fuel costs.
The challenges are many. One is of urea, which is fertilizer that we have. I think in the last couple of days we've been loading to mostly African countries, which we were not doing before. And then now is to do with also petroleum products, which are now sending mainly to African countries.
And to the Niger Delta in Nigeria now. For decades, the region has powered the nation's economy through oil production. But in many of the communities where this wealth is generated, residents say their reality tells a different story, one of pollution, poverty, and lost livelihoods. As CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam reports, fresh protests are once again drawing attention to the environmental and economic toll of oil production.
Fishing is all Simon Atirane has ever known. In Tisu community in Warri Delta State, the creeks once provided him with a steady income and a way to support his family. But today, those waters tell a different story. Decades of oil spills and pollution have driven fish away, leaving his nets empty and his livelihood shattered. Now Simon spends his days doing minor handiwork around the community, anything he can find to make ends meet.
Before, when I would go fishing, I would get a good catch and sell worth 100,000, 200,000 or even 300,000 naira. But we'd be lucky if we can even find a fish to eat. We have nothing more left.
Residents claim that these were once rich fishing waters, but the environmental damage has made it nearly impossible to continue traditional occupations. Simon's story is one shared by many across the Niger Delta. From contaminated rivers to degraded farmlands, livelihoods that sustain generations are disappearing. Multinational oil companies, including Chevron, have operated in the region for decades. While oil production continues, locals say development has not followed.
Our community
has oil. The flow station is just a walking distance, but we don't have electricity, no water, no jobs. The community doesn't even have its personal speedboat to take people to town in case of any medical emergencies.
For decades of years now, Chevron has been operating in our land. We have not been benefiting anything from Chevron. More than 30-something years now, they have been taking the crude oil in our backyard here. No water, no good, no light, no human development.
But the oil company Chevron denies these allegations. Through its corporate affairs office, the firm says it has, over the last 6 decades, made significant socio-economic investments in communities around its areas of operations, and that Chevron Nigeria Limited continues to invest in the communities via the Host Community Development Trust in compliance with regulatory requirements. But Delta State residents continue to demand accountability. The traditional king of the Warri Kingdom, Ogiame Atuashe III, warns that patience is wearing thin.
We are tired of poverty in the midst of abundant wealth. We are tired of being thirsty, yet surrounded by water. Peace without justice is not sustainable, and it is becoming increasingly difficult, even irresponsible, for me to ask our people to continue to accept this unjust pattern.
The Niger Delta remains a key player in global energy supply, yet balancing oil production with environmental protection and community development continues to be a major challenge for both operators and authorities. As oil production continues, communities say the need for environmental restoration and meaningful development has become more urgent than ever. Chevron Nigeria Limited maintains that it has a robust operational excellence management system which guides its operations. It adds that compliance with the provisions of this management systems and regulatory requirements prescribed in extant laws governing oil and gas operations ensure that the firm is able to prevent and manage oil spills. It also says that it collaborates effectively with industry stakeholders, including communities around its areas of operations and regulators, to ensure effective environmental stewardship. But Simon's fading hope in a region that fuels Nigeria's economy remains the paradox of a delicate balance between environmental protection and resource extraction towards a prosperous nation. Efforts to reach Nigeria's National Petroleum Company Limited for comments were futile, as they had not responded to our queries as of the time we went on air. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN, Delta State, Nigeria.
Egypt has signed a new gas cooperation deal with Cyprus as the country seeks to boost its liquefied natural gas exports. The agreement will support the development of Cyprus's offshore gas fields, with exports heading to Egypt for processing and shipment to Europe. With more details, here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim.
The Egypt-Cyprus gas deal is non-binding, meaning that it is a framework agreement intended to guide future negotiations rather than a final commercial contract. The move comes as Egypt faces rising energy costs and regional supply disruptions it hopes to stem. Kamal El-Dessouki leads a company that produces building material. It heavily relies on natural gas to keep operating. The limited energy supplies and disruptions caused by the fallout from the US-Israel war on Iran has proved damaging to his business.
Unfortunately, we are being badly affected by a war we have no part in. Our losses increase as the war prolongs. In cases of wars or external instabilities that you can't control, we try to reduce expenditure and consumption so we can survive as long as possible.
The Egyptian Cypriot Framework Agreement allows Cairo to import trillions of cubic feet of gas from Cypriot fields of Aphrodite and Kronos to be liquefied in Egypt for local consumption and export to energy-starved Europe. It creates a glimmer of hope for the North African country and net oil and gas importer.
It's quite important for the Egyptian economy since Egypt is moving forward towards economic structure, economic reform, and in which industrialization is going to be the engine of growth. We have a very ambitious strategy towards enhancing the competitiveness of the industrial sector in cooperation with the agriculture and information technology. Due to that, we need actually all types of energy, including gas.
Natural gas is equally critical for electricity production, as it runs Egypt's main power stations. To avoid electricity blackouts, the government is adopting a set of energy-saving measures, such as early shop closures, shorter business hours, switching off streetlights, and work-from-home initiatives.
The government has also increased the price of fuel and electricity to make up for the inflation in international oil prices.
This has put pressure on individuals and businesses. Therefore, the Cypriot deal couldn't have come at a better time for many.
This agreement is very good because it shows the government is looking for alternative sources to try to guarantee a constant flow of energy. We as private sector welcome and support this step.
Cairo is working on several fronts. There's a similar agreement to the Cyprus one signed last year with Greece, and another is in the pipeline with Libya. Meanwhile, Israel has resumed gas supplies to Egypt to be liquefied and surplus exported to Europe as well. Officials say the North African country can partially fill the void caused by supply shortages from the stricken Gulf region.
For about 5 years, we have been trying to maximize return from our natural resources. We have the large Zorgas field in the East Mediterranean. We have 2 LNG plants and a strong infrastructure to serve our goal to be a regional gas hub.
In the meantime, Egypt plans to reduce dependence on imported fossil fuels by targeting renewable energy to cover over 42% of total energy production by 2030, in a bid to cushion itself from future energy shocks. Yes, Hakeem for CGTN, Cairo.
Time now for our sports segment. Here are the headlines. Coming up in sports, triumphant return home for the DRC's Leopards after qualifying for the World Cup.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Welcome into Sport on Africa Live with me, Richard Nta. Let's talk a bit of football. The DR Congo's national team has returned home to a grand reception after qualifying for the 2026 FIFA World Cup. Thousands of jubilant supporters came out to greet the team as President Felix Tshisekedi hailed their historic qualification. CGTN Samiro Shimachero reports. Let's take a look.
The Democratic Republic of Congo managed to reach the FIFA World Cup finals for the first time in 52 years. Their 1-0 victory over Jamaica in the World Cup playoffs in Guadalajara, Mexico, sent their nation into jubilation. This led to the resounding welcome they received from their people, led by their president, Felix Tshisekedi.
I promised them that if they took us to the World Cup, the Congolese people and the Congolese government would do whatever they asked. What I'm about to tell you has already been done. Every Leopard player here has already been given a car and a house by the government.
It's an honor, and the president paid the players the tribute they deserve. They made enormous sacrifices. We all know the realities of our country. It's never easy. There have been betrayals, but they gave their all right to the end. They never gave up. They were fully focused, and so congratulations to them.
The DRC has been conflict-ravaged recently, with the government and rebel groups in full battle that has led to the death of thousands and the displacement of millions of people. This qualification was a welcome breath of fresh air for the Central African nation.
We are still here. The war isn't over yet. But first of all, I want to say thank you, because it's been 52 years, and thanks to the head of state, we the children have had this opportunity to fight for our country. We did not fight alone. You have stood by us from the very beginning, and the honor belongs to the whole country. Others started before us, and now it is our turn today, and we will fight for this country. Thank you very much.
The recent qualification has put more appetite in the country, as they are now not only eyeing participation in the 2026 World Cup, but also subsequent tournaments.
This time we won't miss out on the World Cup again. Our lands here have just paved the way. We won't miss out on the World Cup again. Congo will be there for the 2030 World Cup, and will be there for the 2034 one too. This time, we've finally broken the curse.
Africa will now have 10 teams in this year's World Cup, set to be hosted by the USA, Mexico and Canada. The DRC will be in Group K alongside Portugal, Uzbekistan and Colombia as they bid to reach the knockout phase of the competition. Sophia Shimechero, CGTN.
And